what's going to have to happen, and what has been happening a little bit, is people in some of the states will begin nullifying governmental mandates, regulations, and so forth. And even at the state and local level, I think you're going to see, and you are seeing to some extent, local governments doing it on their own, ignoring a lot of what the state tells them to do, and also the federal government tells them what to do. And in the future, that may even lead to secession. I don't know what state would go first, but I think that's really the only hope of restoring genuine freedom, economic freedom in America, and prosperity is the radical decentralization of government in the future. And
You're watching Capital Cause, and my name is Danny. Today's guest is the president of the Mises Institute. It's Dr. Tom DiLorenzo. Tom, thank you so much for coming on the show, my friend.
Pleased to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I am. I'm a big fan of the Mises Institute, and so very happy to have you on here, Tom. But for people who may be coming across you for the first time, if you don't mind just doing a very brief overview of your background story, who is Dr. Tom DiLorenzo?
Well, I was a university economics professor for 40 years, believe it or not. I taught at George Mason, University of Tennessee, Chattanooga, and Loyola University in Maryland for the last 28 years of my career. And I'm the author or co-author of 18 books during that time. My latest is called The Politically Incorrect Guide to Economics, published by Regnery, which is now a part of Skyhorse Publishing. I wrote a couple of books on Lincoln. The Real Lincoln is the one that's probably the biggest seller of all my books. And one called The Problem with Socialism, and another one called How Capitalism Saved America. And I've been part of the Austrian School of Free Market Economics during all this time. I worked with the Mises Institute for more than 35 years, teaching at our summer school, Mises University, and other things. And I've been the president of the Mises Institute for about a year and a half now.
Since you've got your pulse kind of like on the, national interest in terms of, libertarian politics, free market economics, how are things picking up? Are you seeing added interest in libertarian ideas and things of that nature over there at the Mises Institute?
Yeah, that's hard to tell. We don't have any kind of national survey, but a couple of things that have been going on. We just got invited to go. I went to the University of Chicago at the invitation of a group of University of Chicago undergraduate economics students to give a talk, and they held a 2-day conference. The same thing is happening where we at the Mises Institute are going to participate in an event at Villanova University in Pennsylvania. The same thing, a student group funded by an alumnus, and they're creating sort of a libertarian-oriented economic discussion group. And we've had some famous people like Dr. Robert Malone, who discovered the Austrian School of Economics, and his Substack column has over 500,000 readers. And one of his columns last summer was a big, long review of the book, What Has Government Done to Our Money by Murray Rothbard, and also Murray Rothbard's essay, Anatomy of the State. And so I immediately invited him to come and give a talk at our summer school, which is called Mises University, which he did. And his speech there has about 2 million views on YouTube now that he came. And so he became a part of our organization, really. And so I'm encouraged by these sort of things. These are all anecdotal. And of course, the most fun thing is there's a Renato Moicano won a big fight in a big arena, 15,000 people. He grabs the microphone from Joe Rogan and says, if you love your country, you will read Ludwig von Mises. And I immediately invited him to give a talk at the Mises Institute, but he couldn't make it. But we had a T-shirt made with his image on the back and that quotation, if you love your country, you will read Ludwig von Mises. It's part of our stash that we sell in our bookstore. And so these things are all encouraging. People all over the world. There are Mises Institutes all over the world now. Poland, Japan, South Korea, Brazil, and this is good.
Yeah, I saw that UFC call out a few months back that you just mentioned. It's very interesting to see that kind of thing hit the mainstream. It's always reassuring that that your work is kind of paying off there. But let's go ahead and shift over to some current events topics here, Tom. What do you anticipate should be on the radar screen for investors, given everything that's ongoing right now when it comes to government spending, uh, the unpredictability of the markets, et cetera? What should be on the radar screen for investors and just average everyday people, given everything else?
Well, President Trump has made a real mess of things with all the tremendous uncertainty he's created with tariffs. Nothing has been done. Also, with Doge, as it's called, Congress has not codified any of the spending cuts with Doge. And that's all bad, creating all this uncertainty. Businesses can't plan if they don't know what their costs are going to be. And so I think because of all this, things like gold and real estate, real things is where I'm going to be putting more of my investment money, because I'm sort of scared by all the uncertainty. I don't think Trump knows what he's doing. He doesn't know economics. He's a protectionist. We still could have an international trade war depending on what he does, but he seems to announce a different policy every day. He calls it negotiating, but that's very dangerous, because even one little statement by the Fed chairman, for example, can tank the market. It happens all the time. And here's Trump blabbering 100 statements a day about maybe we'll do this and maybe we'll do that, and so that's a bad thing. And so that's I'm not a famous real estate investor or a gold investor, but I think that's one thing I would look for.
Yeah, and you have this fight, whether it be real or contrived, between him and Jerome Powell about lowering interest rates. Right now, it seems like we aren't going to get lower interest rates, and the bond market's doing all sorts of weird things. JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon said just today that expect some instability. I'm paraphrasing what he said, instability in the bond market. So with the debt market, the U.S. debt market being what it is, you have these trade deals that are, some are coming up some deals are being made, some deals are still on the table. You had Trump come out and say that China violated one of the trade deals here. So it's looking fairly chaotic. When it comes to the U.S. debt, I have this infographic. I think it's a really good view of things, of the annual budget. So you've got the revenue coming in from payroll tax, from individual income tax, from corporate income tax, and all these other taxes here as well. That amounts to about $4.9 trillion. Now, it's quite a bit of money, but compared to the spending, which is somewhere to the tune of $6.8 trillion, you have a $1.8 trillion deficit. And making that up is you've got 1.3 trillion in defense. You've got economic and standard of living. That includes things like infrastructure, health, all that stuff. That's about 700 billion. 1.5 trillion in Social Security, 874 billion in Medicare, almost $1 trillion in other obligations, states, transfers to the states, 1.1 trillion. So is there a way out of this, or is this pretty much a foregone conclusion at this point? Does the U.S. have no choice but to try and grow their way out of this debt? How do we get out of this finger trap here?
Well, yeah, that's right. Because every time the government spends an extra $1 trillion, those resources have to come from the private sector, and so and that makes it even worse. That makes economic growth even slower. And so the only way to cut this, of course, is cutting spending and growing the economy. And what President Trump has been doing on deregulation is all good, if they follow through with it. Elon Musk claims to have gotten the ball rolling on getting rid of thousands of bureaucrats, regulatory bureaucrats, and so has Kennedy and others in the administration. And that's all good, because every business person in America spends a part of their workday, or their company does, devoted to paperwork related to government mandates. And if we could just reduce that by 10%, that would create a really healthy boost in the economy. That'll be a huge productivity boost if we could do that. And that's one good thing. But as long as we have more than 700 military installations around the world, as we do, I don't see any hope in ever cutting spending, because the military spending is just, there are no restraints whatsoever on military spending. And it's telling that Elon Musk, I don't think, said one word about military spending. And with all the examinations of all the different departments of the government, I don't recall him saying anything about that.
Yeah, no word. And that is, as we can see here on the chart, that's responsible for a whopping $1.3 trillion annually. And, if you want to put on your tinfoil hat, that doesn't include all the other black budget stuff that could potentially be going on, behind the curtains there. But if you were a betting man, if you had to bet $1 here, Tom, and if they had to cut to meet that $1.8 trillion deficit, I mean, where would they cut from? I mean, the next biggest, or the biggest bucket here, is Social Security, transfers to the state. Do they have enough political capital to put an axe to Social Security, do you think?
No, they would never do that. The whole system will implode eventually if we keep going down this road. And I think what's going to have to happen, and what has been happening a little bit, is people in some of the states will begin nullifying governmental mandates, regulations, and so forth. And even at the state and local level, I think you're going to see, and you are seeing to some extent, local governments doing it on their own, ignoring a lot of what the state tells them to do, and also the federal government tells them what to do. And in the future, that may even lead to secession. I don't know what state would go first, but I think that's really the only hope of restoring genuine freedom, economic freedom in America, and prosperity, is the radical decentralization of government in the future. And because it's, even Thomas Jefferson thought in his day that the government was too big and unmanageable and ungovernable, and
Back in the
350
1700s.
million people basically governed by 100 clowns in Congress, or fewer. It's a ridiculous system, but that's the one we've got.
Yeah, it sounds like he'd have a stroke if he saw what we have today. Then, if that's what he said back then.
Oh yeah, he would organize another revolution. I think they seceded from the British Empire, and he would want to secede from the American Empire.
So yeah, you mentioned.
Jefferson would have been a Confederate had he been alive during the Civil War.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a bit, especially touching on your book, The Real Lincoln. But really quick, you mentioned secession, staying on topic here. You are starting to see kind of the groundwork being laid, as when it comes to certain states like Florida. Florida's laying legislation to, or I think they may have already passed it, to enshrine gold as legal tender.
Yeah, gold and silver. Yeah,
gold and what?
And silver.
And silver, yes, silver. So are these states who are pursuing gold as legal tender and silver as well to satisfy transactions, are they kind of laying the groundwork for future secession attempts?
I think there probably are some of the legislators who have gotten this done, have that in mind. If not formal secession, doing what I said, sort of just nullifying and ignoring the central government, the federal government, and going their own way. And Florida is not the only state that has been going in this direction in terms of gold and silver. But Florida is the leader in all of this. And Governor DeSantis now wants to get rid of the property tax. And I think he just yesterday or in the last couple of days, I think he's working on giving every homeowner, resident homeowner in the state of Florida, $1,000 reduction in their property tax. Because there's been sort of a soft secession going on where all the people living in socialist hellholes like New York City and Illinois and California moving to Florida, Texas, South Carolina, they're driving up real estate prices. And then with that goes property taxes. And so Florida has to do something about this. And DeSantis wants to get rid of the property tax altogether. And if that succeeds, I wouldn't be surprised if other states copy him in doing that and finding out that it's possible they can survive after all. The main opposition will be the teachers' unions because that's who benefits primarily from the property tax.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of gold and as legal tender, to kind of piggyback off of the previous discussion, is Bitcoin money in your view? It is, it's often called digital gold. Whether you agree with that or disagree with that, I mean, that's a big point of contention. But from the what is the Mises viewpoint on something like Bitcoin and cryptocurrency? Is that real money?
Well, it has attributes of real money. It's not a very good store of value right now because it's so volatile. If you made money in Bitcoin, you think it's a great store of value, but a lot of people lost a lot of money too with it, and but that doesn't mean it will always be volatile. The Mises Institute held a debate a couple of years ago with one person making the case that gold and gold-based currency will be the future, and the other person said no, cryptocurrency will be the future. And so, we're not fortune tellers here, but I would like to see more competition with and more competing currencies. I think that's a big part of the solution to allow competing currencies, which were essentially driven out of the market during the Civil War when the greenback dollar was established as the monopoly currency, and taxes were imposed on other currencies that existed at the time to drive them out of the market. And so, Friedrich Hayek, who's probably the most well-known Austrian school economist, wrote a book called On Competing Currencies, maybe 30 or 40 years ago. And I think it's every bit as relevant today as it was then. And we had that system in America for years, and it worked better than the Fed and the monopoly money of the greenback.
We had a number of competing currencies, didn't we? I mean, what was the volume like? Like, how many currencies did we have, like ballpark wise?
Well, there were dozens at one time, competing currencies. My favorite story about that is that there's a currency, the Citizens Bank of Louisiana. Their currency was called the DIX, D-I-X, which is 10 in French, and they had a very high ratio of reserves of gold in their vaults. And so the currency was very trustworthy, and it was used all over the country. And people from the upper Midwest, Minnesota, places like that, they would come down the Mississippi River with barges full of wheat or whatever they were selling. And they would go home and they would brag that they came home with a pocket full of Dixies, because that's what they called the Dix. And that's how the South became known as the land of Dixie, Dixieland. And it was named after the currency. And it was widely used in Minnesota, even though the bank that issued it was in New Orleans. And I saw that the building that bank was in once when I was in New Orleans. There's a faded image of on the side of a bank, a building. It's no longer a bank there, but that's where it came from. And there were many currencies like that, and that's what competition was about. There were other currencies, of course, that were shady, and they had very low level of gold reserves, and they went out of business because people didn't trust them as much as they trusted the Dixie. And that was a good system. It wasn't perfect, but economic researchers have told us that it was the most stable monetary system we've ever had was during that era. It wasn't perfect, but the Fed has made everything more unstable ever since the Fed was created in 1913 than it was before it was created.
Tom, so we're getting these reports from insiders from within the White House, and they say things along the lines of with Donald Trump, it's usually the last person that talks to him that holds the greatest impression in his mind. So
Yeah.
if you were the last person to talk to President Trump, what would you tell him regarding, the economy, foreign policy, et cetera? If you had his ear as you were like, 8 p.m. at night and you're the last person he's going to meet with, what would you say?
Well, I would say he has to keep his promise and do everything he can to end all these wars that we get involved in, and bring the troops home from at least 699 of the 700 plus military installations we have around the world. That's sort of and none of them have anything whatsoever to do with defending anyone or anything in America. That's the first thing I would do, because it's sickening to see young American service people come back with missing arms and legs or dead for nothing, in vain. And I think, I was a teenager during the Vietnam War era, and we all know that was all in vain, and that we were never going to be conquered by the communists, in Southeast Asia, but as the CIA said we were. And that would be the top thing that I would say. Quit funding all these wars. Quit forcing the American taxpayers to fund the war in the Middle East and the war in Ukraine and elsewhere.
Yeah, what is the kind of hiccup when it comes to the Ukraine war? Because that was the war that he promised to end the fastest, is the Ukraine war, and we're well into the presidency and it's still ongoing. If anything, it's actually intensified. But if President Biden was still in charge, he would. I'm not defending Biden, by the way. If he was in charge, he would still be getting the brunt of the attack from the anti-war movement. But it seems like Trump has kind of gotten shielded from it. What's the hang-up with the Ukraine war? Why haven't we been able to see any peace brokered there?
Well, that place is so shady, and I think there are a lot of politicians in Washington who have become very wealthy through their connections with the Ukrainian oligarchs, including Zelensky himself, who is reportedly a billionaire now. He's a two-bit failed comedian, and now all of a sudden he's one of the wealthiest people in the world. And I think a lot of our politicians, Joe Biden and his son are not the only political family that has made a lot of money through the shady deals in the Ukraine. And so there's probably a lot of extortion going on with our government. Even Trump is sending them more bombs and more ammunition. Why? Why? And the same with Israel. He's sending them more bombs to kill more people, and which is the opposite of what he promised he was going to do.
Yeah, and speaking of the Middle Eastern war, there are these indirect negotiations going on with Iran regarding their nuclear program, but then you have this weird dynamic where it appears that there's a rift ongoing between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. Whether that's real or not, whether that's a good cop, bad cop type of deal to get Iran to lower their guard, I have no idea. But can Iran trust the United States as an honest broker for between in a nuclear deal negotiation, given the fact that the administration that did tear up the first deal is now currently in power? Like, what, from the perspective of Iran, what's the point of these negotiations if you've already seen the opposite party, the other party, already renege on a prior deal?
Yeah, well, they know that Hillary Clinton, when she was Secretary of State under Obama, they talked Gaddafi into getting rid of his nuclear aspirations, his nuclear weapons, and then look what happened to him. And so I think the mullahs in Iran are not unaware of that. But then the whole world knows Trump is different. He's different. He's not your typical Washington politician, and he's done some amazing things that are amazingly different than your typical Washington politician. But I think the reason why there's all this talk about a tiff with Netanyahu is that one of his top advisors not too long ago was transferred to the UN because President Trump discovered that he was trying to manipulate him into going along with starting a war with Iran, and he basically fired him. He claims he didn't fire him, but he gave him some sort of a make work job at the United Nations instead, and that's probably my guess is why there's sort of a cool down in the relationships, his relationship with Netanyahu. But who can predict what's going to happen?
Yeah, totally. Well, I think we've covered pretty much everything on the current event side. I know you mentioned the real Lincoln. I'm curious as to, I mean, that was your most successful book from what I recall you saying. Who is the real Lincoln? Just out of curiosity for the audience to know.
Well, there's a lot of mythology about that period of history. If you just read his inaugural address, his first inaugural address, if you want to know why there was a war, I call it Lincoln's "Slavery Forever" speech, because he starts out saying that I have no intention of disturbing slavery. I never have. You could read all my past speeches. And then at the end of the speech, he endorses a constitutional amendment that had already passed the House and the Senate called the Corwin Amendment that would have prohibited the federal government from ever interfering with slavery. And right in and so he announced to the world in his first inaugural address that he said, I have no objection to making the protection of slavery express and irrevocable. That's his word, irrevocable, in the Constitution. And in the same speech, he uses the words invasion and bloodshed to describe what would happen to any state that failed to collect the newly doubled tariff tax. 2 days earlier, his predecessor, President James Buchanan, signed into law the Morrill Tariff, which more than doubled the average tariff rate. And at the time, there was no income tax, and about 90% or more of federal revenue came from tariffs. So there was a doubling of federal tax rates 2 days earlier. And here's Lincoln threatening war over tax collection, and he came through with a threat. He followed through with a threat. The South said, we're not going to send money to Washington, D.C. any more than we would send money to London or Paris. And so if you want to know why there was a war, that's why. And that's just one thing. There's a lot of other things about why I call it my book, The Real Lincoln. But that's just one thing, one way in which the Civil War history has been grossly distorted, in my view.
Interesting. Fascinating stuff here, Tom. Anything else you want to talk about before you wrap up?
Well, I'll promote one of my other books called Hamilton's Curse. There was a book published by John Steele Gordon called Hamilton's Blessing. Alexander Hamilton once said that a public debt could be a national blessing, because the wealthier people of the country would buy the government debt, and they would become, therefore, a lobbying bloc in favor of higher taxes. Hamilton always wanted bigger government and more taxes, because they would want to make sure there's enough money in the treasury to pay off the principal and interest on their bonds. And so in America, the left in America has finally discovered that Hamilton was the real founding father of big government in America. So my book, Hamilton's Curse, is a challenge to the whole idea that Hamilton's economic ideas were a blessing. He was basically an 18th century mercantilist on economics, and that's the kind of system that the American Revolution was fought to escape from. And here comes Hamilton and his political benefactors, such as Robert Morris, wanting to impose the same system on America. And they eventually succeeded. Our system of crony capitalism is basically Hamilton's system that we live under today. My old friend, Bob Higgs, the economist Robert Higgs, says the American economic system, he calls it participatory fascism. And fascism allowed private property and private enterprise, but it was so heavily regulated and regimented that it was de facto government-owned enterprise. And that's what Higgs says is basically our system. But that's the Hamiltonian system.
Yeah, very fascinating. They're able to see this so many hundreds of years down the line, what the natural conclusion to all of this. It's a number of small acts that just build up into what we have today. So thank you so much for coming on, Tom. It's been a pleasure. Where can people find you if they want to hear and see more of your work?
Well, I've been a columnist for LewRockwell.com for a long time. LEW, man's name, at LewRockwell.com. And Mises.org is our website. You can check out my articles and you get a great free economic education on Mises.org. So check that out also.
Awesome. We'll have the links to that down below. Be sure to check it out, guys. If you're interested, if you got value out of this podcast, drop us a like, drop us a comment, right? Go Tom, go in the comment section. If you agreed with what Tom had to say, if you disagree with anything, that's perfectly fine too. But let me know what you disagreed on. I do, in fact, read the comments. So drop me your thoughts down below. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss an episode. Liking, subscribing, commenting, sharing the video. All that goes a long way in helping us boost this channel and this video in the algorithm so more people can see us. And it supports me in the process. So much appreciated, regardless of whatever you guys do. If you want to support us monetarily and get a cool product in return, check out our cool affiliates and sponsors down below. Supporting them helps support the channel, and you also get a cool product, like I said, with a pretty good discount on some of these things. So check out the description box and pin comment for what you can find there. Check out our Substack as well. It's capitalcosm.substack.com for early access, ad-free versions, and uncensored content for all of my videos that warrant it. All right, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.